If it says we're live, great. So I'm doing one of my chats again, and I'm very fortunate and blessed to be joined by Thomas today. I normally chat with foodie people. I found myself in the woods with Thomas the other day and heard about his new book, got a copy of his new book, and I've started reading it and was just so pleased that Thomas agreed to have a chat with me. So he's not a foodie guy. I'd say he's more of a nature guy. How would you describe yourself, Thomas, in that 100 words or less?
Yeah, as long as you make the signal when I've said enough. So I've been training people in nature connection, shamanism, and bushcraft for 25 years. So that's really been my focus, but I trained as an artist. I've been a martial artist for a long time and a meditator. So those are all kind of part of the weave of what I bring. And the book is really I wrote one book which is called True Nature, which what I've done is I've taken one of the chapters of that and expanded it into the second book, which is I think one of the things that we really need right now, which is to be able to access the natural state, which is much less stressed and more calm and focused, the alpha state. So the book is really focusing on that. And so, I'm
great. No, that is a great. I've got the book here from B to A. I had to turn it around because the screen's the wrong way around. Beta to Alpha: Hacking the Flow State in Love, Life, Work, and Parenting. And with these chats, I often just say, so people viewing and knowing, the dynamic we have with each other. Like I say, I ended up in the forest with you under the guise of looking for mushrooms. I thought I was looking for mushrooms, and after spending 2 minutes in the forest, I was with my 3-year-old son. After spending 2 minutes in the forest with Thomas, I realized, no, it was a deeper reason I was there. It was to chat with you and to get hold of a copy of your book and dive straight into it. It's a state that, like you say, we all know, and I have lots of books, flow state this, but never have I heard it described so easily. And actually the concept of getting into flow state, I've never had it explained so easily.
Well,
so
I think that rests the reason that that people think that it's not that easy to get into flow is, so in one of the chapters I look at one of the preeminent writers, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote a book called Flow in the 80s. And if you Google the flow state, he will come up, and he developed these 8 characteristics of flow. And he sort of said, look, you can't actually just access that state. You have to understand the characteristics and sort of reverse engineer your way into the state. But what's happened for me is I've been training people in moving silently and invisibly in nature for 25 years and observing them very carefully. And it's really through that I've started to understand when people are in a flow state and how to get into a flow state. Because as I say in the book, watching people stalking and moving, stalking speed is 1 minute per step. So this is a, tricky physical maneuver for most folks. But I'd be working with people, and within about 6 minutes of them moving at that pace, the birds would start to come and sing around them in the forest, and basically be saying, look, we don't recognize you as how humans are normally sort of experienced in this environment. We can feel that you're already part of the environment. So a sort of quality of oneness has occurred through that shift into the alpha state. And the birds are reflecting this back to the people in the forest. And what would happen is that the birds would start singing at minute 6. pretty much every time, and I'd be counting people through a series of steps, 1 minute per step. To slow down to that speed is takes a bit of assistance, really, because we're used to moving so fast. But then I started to kind of put a theory together about what was happening, and it became clear to me that they were shifting into the alpha range, which is very close to the Schumann resonance. Otto Schumann, a physicist who figured out that there was this natural resonance in 1953, and then 10 years later, with a couple of other physicists, started to be able to measure this resonance that is at about the same sort of resonant state as the alpha state is resonant in the brain. And so as our tiny little pond of brainwaves starts to match the natural sort of resonant field of the earth, that's the point at which the birds and animals sort of go, oh, hang on a minute, you're one of us.
Rather so slow down to harmonize with nature.
Yeah. Because the so-called normal state of human consciousness, the beta state, is much faster. Drink a cup of coffee and woof, you're off into a beta state. And, and there are quite a few things that are very different in those states. For example, the prefrontal cortex gets really busy when you're in a beta state. And that's the part that is self-critical. So when you're in a flow state, you're not criticizing yourself. So, for example, maybe you're playing tennis or a guitar or something like that, and then you suddenly think, hey, I'm doing great. And that's when you screw up. Because the prefrontal cortex has got busy and you shifted out of that state of absorption into what you're doing, and you bounced out into the so-called normal state. And my view is that the alpha state is the natural state for humans, as I've experienced with witnessing students shift into that state and it having this beautiful impact within nature. So that's where the sort of the theory and then eventually a much simpler practice started to come from that.
Great. So I think you've almost answered my first question. In your book, there's a part that really struck me of being, and I could really resonate with this, being really self-critical and not good enough for a situation. And then I don't know what changed in my environment, but thinking much higher of myself and thinking, oh, I can easily do this, when I wasn't any good at tennis. Oh, I can play tennis. And it's almost like, for me, reading your book and understanding, no, neither are true. But when you're stuck on being super self-critical, or when you're stuck on thinking you can do everything and you're God's gift, neither are beneficial. So you're saying when you're in an alpha state, you don't have to think you're either good at something or you're terrible at something.
Well, the thing is that internal dialogue, one of the other things in the book, in the parenting chapter, that I think is really useful information for us to understand, is that there are four main brainwave states. The slowest is the delta state. So when we're born, from 0 to 4 years, we're predominantly in the delta state. And the delta state is closest to, our idea of the source. We sort of come out of the unconditioned. We're not entirely unconditioned when we're born, because, our parents might have been thinking, they're a gift from God, or, oh, what a mistake. So there's already some conditioning in play. But we're pretty much as unconditioned as it gets when we're born. And that delta state. So what I'd like to do is to find a word that helps us to get a feeling of what that state is. And the word that I use for the delta state is awe, AWE, when we're just like, And if you've had children and you're going around about your business with the newborn, strangers will just come up to you and go, oh, and be, you know, be reminded of that resonance, because the child, the baby, is in that resonant state, and they're expressing that resonance.
So you're
And
saying a baby's a beautiful thing, and obviously for me, my say, is why people see beauty. Are you saying that the baby's emanating that brainwave, which is almost contagious? So we're picking up on that brainwave. The baby's
it's more, it's sort of, so all of the different brainwave states are natural. So we were gifted 4 years of predominantly experiencing the unconditioned state. Now that's an intelligent universe that is going to give us access to that as its primary gift. And then with, you know, you can look at, you know, 1-year-olds and they're sort of trying to get the hang of their bodies and trying to sort of you know, it's wonderful to sort of watch that happening, you know, as they're coming to one and just really starting to stand and walk, and then the next thing that they're grappling with is language and so on. But you know, but they're still in this very unconditioned state. And then as they hit 4, their imagination starts to really blossom, and that's when they shift into the next brainwave state, which is the theta range. And that's really governed by imagination. So that means that we don't have to discipline them. We just have to think of a game, gamify what it is we would like them to do, and then suddenly they're on board.
yeah.
And you know, there's, you know, and that imaginative aspect is, you know, is there kind of, you know, a little bit earlier on, but they're fully in that from the age of 4 to 8. You know, everything is magical.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons that we sort of have these magical memories of being a child, because we've been in this very magical state. And the theta state, if as an adult you took a teaching plant like ayahuasca and we measured your brainwave states, we measure a theta state. But even without that, you go through 2 hours of REM sleep every night, and in the dream state, again, if we measured your brainwave state, we get a theta reading. So we can sort of, if we take the characteristics of a dream state, we can start to extrapolate from that what the theta state characteristics are. You know, there's no time. We can be in the future or the past. There's no physical limitation. We could fly and swim underwater and breathe and things like that in the dream state. So in the theta realm, so this is the realm of the shaman as well. And so we get 4 years of exposure to that. And then at 8, we start to transit into the flow state.
Before you go on, and I want you to definitely carry on with the 4 states, but just to go back on the 2 states so far, is the average person able to access those other 2 states in waking life? I know in dream state you've said we can.
So not so much.
Okay.
Unless, you know, maybe if they're an artist or a musician, then that's often where that sort of inspiration is coming from, is from their relationship with the theta state kind of within. You know, so in a conscious way, so, you know, okay, we might drink a glass of wine and that will move us towards theta. You know, so there are simple things that we're doing the whole time that naturally shift our state. And that's why you drink enough wine, you fall asleep, because it's moving you towards that sort of point. But to really be conscious in a theta state, then yes, there are other things that are required. We need to sort of understand, if you like, the language of spirit. And if we're you know, spirit communicates through signs, symbols, dreams, feelings, and emotions. So we need those aspects to be in play for us to be able to access that brainwave state. But it is quite simple. I mean, I have developed a theta breath dynamics as well as the alpha breath dynamics and the delta breath dynamics. So in the book, it just talks about the alpha breath dynamics. But within the theta range, there are aspects of that are quite challenging. And so it's really important, I haven't put that in the book because I feel that some training and understanding of that realm is really necessary in order to, be given a simple way of accessing that state. But it isn't, the imagination, if you like, is the gateway into that. And, one of my favorite examples of somebody who we all know, Einstein, he said, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy stories. If you want them to be really intelligent, read them loads of fairy stories. Because he's saying feed the imagination.
Yeah.
And when he talks about his discoveries, they start off as thought experiments, and for that you could say visualizations. And then he starts to put the words around it, and then he starts to do the maths, not the other way around. And he says that logic will take you from A to B, and imagination will take you everywhere else. And
Amazing.
so he's talking about sort of pulling out of his imaginative universe, his imaginative realm, the discoveries, that have revolutionized science. So one of the things that I find really difficult when I look at most normal education is, that's just imagination. And all of the things that stimulate and encourage imagination are not considered as important as things that stimulate the use of logic. And yet it's through imagination that everything that is around us has been imagined before it's been made.
Amazing. Well, I take responsibility. I think I took you out of your flow state. You were going through the 4 states, and I just got really interested in that second one. So we did delta,
theta, and we're starting to move into alpha. And so then from 8 to 12, the young person moves into alpha. There are reasons. So ADHD, for example, is if a young person is traumatized, usually between the ages of 4 and 8, then they might not shift into the alpha range, and that's called ADHD, because one of the characteristics of the theta state is having abundant energy, but not very much focus. So, and I've worked a lot with children over the 25 years of training that I've done. I've worked with loads of schools and I've watched the ADHD kids very carefully, and they have this abundance of energy and a kind of extrasensory perception. We'll camouflage one of the instructors to the point where you could stand on them and you wouldn't even know they were there. And the ADHD kid comes over and goes, "Well, what are you doing down there?" Because they can just sense it. Or we're walking through the forest and they go, "What's that?" as a hawk flies over the tiny little opening in the trees. So there's this extrasensory quality that is part of the theta range. And what tends to happen, or what I've witnessed, is that when I've shown people alpha breath dynamics, then the trauma that has been keeping them in the theta state arises, comes back into their consciousness. And they feel the calm and focus. I had this experience with, I was at an event teaching, and these 2 young men came into my space and said, "Hey, can we roll up a cigarette?" And I said, "Of course you can." And they sat down, and one of them was just, all over the place. And I'm like, "Oh, great. I've just developed this technique. I'd love to share it with you." And I could see that he had ADHD, but also it turned out that he was also Aspergic. And so after I'd badgered him for 5 minutes, he was like, "Oh, damn, I'm Aspergic. I can tell that I can sense that you have a good intention. So, all right, I'll do it." And so we did the alpha breath dynamics for 2 minutes. And then he was just sat there like a Buddha, going, "I never felt this calm in my whole life." And at that moment, he burst into tears and said, I was sexually abused as a child, and I've never told anybody. And so me and his friend, his friend was like, oh, mate, put his arm around him, and we just held the space for him while that experience kind of came out, basically. And that was the theoretical perspective that I had. And when I witnessed that, it was clear that, that there was some truth in that.
That's amazing.
And so the shift into alpha of calm and focus, this is the period from 8 to 12 when we really want to bring our young people out into nature. Because it's the natural resonance. So as well as all the kind of, tiny little finicky details of things that they'll be wanting to do, and the real engagement and absorption in tasks and activities, we want to bring them into nature so that when they hit puberty and they shift into the fourth state, the beta state, the so-called normal state, where the prefrontal cortex gets busy and we start this internal, what we call an internal dialogue, which is actually a monologue, this sort of argument with the self about, you're a piece of shit. No, you're an angel. No, you're a piece of shit. No, you're, and that just goes on, our whole lives, unless we're able to bring a bit of spaciousness into the mind, maybe through meditation or other approaches, yoga, martial arts, etc. But the alpha breath dynamics helps us to shift into a state where there isn't any oxygen for that to happen, for that dialogue to take place, because within 2 minutes we start to become really absorbed in the present. And going back to what Mihai Csikszentmihalyi was saying, is that he says it's not possible to develop a way of accessing the alpha state like that. And so I sort of challenge some of his thinking, because I've developed this method that only takes 2 minutes. And then also the other part that I felt was really missing from his 8 characteristics is the connection with nature that can really occur, because that's where most of my work has kind of grown out of. So this quality of oneness that we start to experience with the natural world. And so by taking our young people out and helping them to go, look, you can gain this experience just from going for a little walk, or, playing outside. And people of my generation spent most of their childhood playing outdoors.
Yeah.
I think that it's terrible that's not the case much anymore. We'd just be booted out of the house because we were too noisy and messy, and come back when it got dark, But so it's really important that we take our children at that, at any stage, but especially at that stage, so that when they shift at puberty into the beta state, they kind of know that they can just go for a little walk and they'll come into a calm and focused state. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I think we're answering this question. I had a lot of people interested in this chat with you today, because I said I was having it, and we're going to talk about nature connection and how nature connection is so healing. Is it because being in nature, you do slow down, you appreciate the slowness of things, and you enter that alpha state? Or is something else happening that means being in nature is so healing?
I think that there are lots of things that are happening. We are nature, and our society, the way that it's structured, isn't really designed for human beings, and especially isn't really designed for us to be kind of natural. If we look at the way that we walk with the heel striking the ground first, this is not a natural way of walking. This has happened because we've developed shoes. And this is one of the things that we need to, if we just relax the ankle. So if this is my foot and I get my ankle really soft, then the foot starts to meet the ground in a natural way, for example. So we're getting more oxygen, we're getting an interaction with the entities of the earth. our vision maybe starts to become more natural in that it shifts. We start to listen, maybe. But, again, these are things that often we need to be mentored into, because it's like, listen to what? Well, if you listen to the silence, then you'll hear everything else.
Yeah.
So it's there are quite a few things that shift. Feeling the wind, or the rain, or the sun. Those just experiencing. In a tactile way, the smells of nature and so on, and just that sensory input brings us out of the self-critical mind and back into the senses. But we can be moving in the forest and creating a huge disturbance. Most people, as they come into nature, because they're in a beta state, they're creating a great disturbance for all the birds and animals. And as we start to be able to know the difference between an alpha and a beta state in ourselves, then we'll find that nature, which is like this wonderful mirror that reflects us back to ourselves, starts to reflect this kind of sense of calm and by the birds singing around us and not being afraid of us, because they're not going, hang on a minute, we don't understand this resonance. This is really scary. What's this? And you can run experiments. One of the things that I say to my students at the beginning is, please don't believe a word I tell you, because that's just lazy. You need to run your own experiments and rest on your experience of these things.
Yeah.
Because that's your greatest treasure, is your experience of anything. So an experiment that you could try, crows are one of the most intelligent of the birds. They rate very highly on a scale of intelligence. So what you can do is, the next time you see a group of crows, you can start to think really beautiful thoughts towards them. Wow, aren't they beautiful? Don't they have a powerful beak? It's almost like there's a black rainbow in the colors of their feathers. Whatever it is, something really beautiful, think that about them and see how they respond. And then just change your thinking. Crow pie, I wonder what that tastes like. Could I hit one with a stone from here? And see what effect it has, because what's going on internally in your mind, you think that has no effect, but that is you're transmitting a quality of energy through that, and you can have can run some experiments to check what's actually happening in that way.
Fantastic. So they're all natural states, but the fourth state we finished on, you go into puberty in the beta. Is it possible you remain in beta? Obviously, when you're sleeping, you go through different states. But if you were, I don't want to pigeonhole anyone in. If you were a 9 to 5 working on a computer under fluorescent lights, you didn't really spend much time in nature. Are you likely to spend, if not all of your waking time, but most of it in a beta state? Or is there a natural oscillation?
I think that a large percentage of the population do spend most of their time in beta. But the thing is that, anything that you enjoy for its own sake, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about autotelic personality types, meaning that people who like to do things for their own sake. So what I love about the bushcraft and nature connection is that all of the skills, you can never say you've mastered any of them. You can get quite good at them, but there's always more to learn. So they're all kind of autotelic activities. They're all activities that you can start and know, like studying plants, for example. I'm continually, every now and again, going to the kitchen, I go, well, what's cinnamon good for? And I've discovered it's an antiviral. And I'm like, oh, well, that's quite handy right now, and the same with star anise, and I'm going, oh, that's quite handy. so it's sort of like we can think we know lots about a subject, and there's always more to know. And so, tracking is another one, fire making. Yes, there are 22 different ways to make fire, so we can be continuing to practice and enhance our skill in loads of different sort of ways, and so on. So each of the skills has this depth of possible practice, which means that there's this sense of curiosity and interest in learning.
Yes.
And curiosity for me is one of my characteristics. So I put together some characteristics that I felt were missing from Mihai's characteristics, and curiosity is one of the key ones. And
Good.
because it just, sort of like there's no end point, and you're continually drawn into the present through your inquiry.
So that wasn't one of his original.
No.
Great. Do you want to have you got any other ones? Because for me, curiosity, that awe state is gonna.
Well, it's more absorption is the sort of main characteristic, if you like, where you're just totally absorbed. So any activity where you've got that, you go, oh my goodness, an hour went past. I thought that was 5 minutes, and that's one of Mihai's characteristics is that experience of time. And so 5 of his characteristics I'm down with. I think they're awesome, and he's nailed it. But there are a couple that I just have a little bit of an exception, take exception to. And then I'm like, well, there are these other things. So oneness with nature is one that isn't sort of an aspect of his characteristics. And yet for me, it feels like that kind of quality is really missing, from his study. Is how that starts to happen. And that's really very easy to accomplish, that feeling of oneness with the natural world, and can be measured by the response of the birds to us. When we're in that state of absorption, they just go about their normal business without being disturbed by us. And the rest of nature is listening to the birds because they're the natural alarm system. So we're then not disturbing all of the other mammals and so on that are around us, and we get to see them way more regularly and easily than most people.
Yeah, I guess that's why when I was talking before about not wanting to pigeonhole people, someone that doesn't go into nature. I guess my first experience of flow was when I was working inside under fluorescent lights, and it was pure absorption. I was so fascinated by my job, and I had a back-to-back clients, and I'd be working, and what felt like 15, 20 minutes had been 3 hours. And it was that first, for me, experience of just being so absorbed. Would I have definitely been in an alpha brain?
Definitely. Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it's not, you don't have to be, in the wilderness. And the thing is that when we start to be able to access that state, then we can start to bring the forest state wherever we go. So we can, so one of the things that's quite interesting, if you go back to Otto Schumann, is that when he first developed this device to measure the Schumann resonance, he found that he could measure it in nature and over the sea, but he'd go into a city and there was no reading for this ultra low frequency, because the 50 hertz pulse of AC electricity knocked out this natural ultra low frequency. So that means that in those not so natural environments, that natural frequency isn't there. But if we know how to access that through, our sort of whatever flow means we might be, absorbed in, then we bring that state ourselves. So as we become skillful at coming into an alpha state, then we can just generate that wherever we are, and it's not, it doesn't. The fact that it's kind of been suppressed by the other frequencies that are around us doesn't matter. A bit like the baby generating this delta state. we then start to generate that state, and people go, oh wow, you feel really calm, and enjoy that calmness as if they were standing by a tree or something, because that's what we're putting out.
And you move through the different states. The alpha state sounds really useful and enchanting. Is there any downsides for being only in alpha state? Is the benefits obviously from the...
Well, yes, the downsides are that that argument in your head just stops. It's awful. I just don't have those voices happening anymore. So I feel a bit lonely. No, kidding. But there aren't. It's a natural state as far as I'm concerned. So it increases your capacity to heal yourself and others. It increases your creativity, and the flow states. You're in a state of flow. Mm-hmm. So I suppose you could get carried away and lost in something. That might be the sort of downside, is that your timekeeping might not be as good as somebody who's more in a beta state, but the time is going to pass so much more swiftly and enjoyably for you than somebody in a beta state who's watching every second sort of tick away. So that's possibly the one downside, is that you might not necessarily turn up on time, or whatever, because you're so absorbed in the flow of what's happening. But I think that with watches and clocks pretty much everywhere, it's kind of difficult to really lose track of time in that way, which is a bit of a shame. But
if that's the only downside, I'm happy to be in flow state more often than not.
I mean, personally, that's that's my preferred state, unless I need a theta state or a delta state for some other reason.
So is the theta delta state beyond flow?
They're slower states. So the age, what's really interesting is that the age range of 0 to 4 is also the speed at which the brain is operating. 0.5 to 4 hertz. So that's tiny little electrical pulses happening in the brain, and which is the delta range, 0 to 4. Then, these are approximate, and then about 4 to 8 is the theta range, 8 to 12 is the alpha range, 12 to 26 and above is the beta range. And then you get up to about, I think it's 40 hertz. And then you hit this fifth resonance, which is called the gamma state. And that was only discovered when they shifted from using an analog way of measuring brainwave states to a digital. And then they started to find the gamma state in monks and nuns who are doing loving kindness-based meditation. And again, if you take that apart, meditation, so you've got a meditative state, a calm and focused state, where you're focusing on sending love to those close to you. And so a butterfly has just turned up. How nice. Sending love to those close to you, and then slowly sending love to, acquaintances, and then your worst enemies, and so on. So the brain has these tiny little electrical pulses. So this is my current theory about the gamma state, is that we need that imaginative capacity, where we're visualizing something. We need a calm state, and we need to be visualizing. But then it's the connection with the heart, and the heart can produce up to 2 watts of electrical energy that can be measured up to 10 feet away from the body. Currently, by science, they might have improved that by now. But so there's this much larger sort of electromagnetic generator that is getting involved in the tiny little pulses in the brain. And so my theory is that the range of theta, which is where the imaginative capacity is happening, starts at 4 and goes up to about 80 or 8, sorry. And so as the heart gets involved in that, then it amplifies that speed. And one of the characteristics of the gamma state, so you've got this 40 hertz happening, which I think is the heart getting involved in the electromagnetic goings on in the brain, and that amplifying that. And one of the things that happens in the gamma state is that both hemispheres start to function together. So if you've seen the film Limitless, it's sort of that kind of quality that starts to occur, a sense of bliss and this capacity to access all of the things that might have been in your memory banks or available to you. So that's the 5th state, which I don't really go into talking about in the book because the focus is really on the alpha state. But the gamma state is really a fine state to engender. And again, if you take it apart, you start to see what the components are, and then you can engineer yourself into that state really quite easily.
Quite easy. I was going to say, have you got any breathing techniques to get into the gamma?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I liked, you struck a chord when you said limitless. I want those capabilities without having to take a pill. So you can do that just through breathing and peripheral vision and synchronized movement.
Yeah. So the components of, if you take the components of the loving kindness based meditation, you're imagining a person and you're sending them love. So those are the 2 components, that you're generating a feeling of joy and love in the heart, and you're imagining somebody to be sending that to. So that you could just be accessing a beautiful memory. And one of the memories that I use for that is when my first child was born, my daughter Amber. I go back to that memory, and that brings that feeling into my system. So I'm imagining and feeling together, which are 2 of the aspects of how we communicate with the spirit realm as well. So by bringing those aspects together, that starts to generate this quality of feeling, which then has some really awesome attributes.
Another book in the making, perhaps?
Well, yes, I'm one of the things that I'm writing about is about the theta characteristics, the delta characteristics, and then also the gamma characteristics, and then how we can access those states really easily as well, because the method that I've developed takes 2 minutes, which is faster than the science says is possible. The science says it takes 6 minutes to entrain the brain into a different state. And I don't think it even takes 2 minutes. I just set it at 2 minutes because I found that the majority of people could access it within 2 minutes. And for somebody who's got ADHD, 2 minutes is a doable thing, to be able to sort of focus for 2 minutes is possible. Whereas, focusing for longer than that just maybe isn't really a doable thing. Yeah, but yes, I mean, book 3 is I'm working on book 3 at the moment, but I haven't quite figured out, I've been working with ideas of the warrior of the heart as the focus for book 3. But these characteristics do seem to be really quite important to put out there. But like I said, there are some pitfalls with working with the theta state that need to be understood. There are more pitfalls with the theta state than there are with the alpha state. Being a bit late isn't a big pitfall, but I could maybe on another session I could talk about some of those pitfalls.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, we're coming up on time, and I want everyone just to note down the book and also where they can find you, Thomas.
So my main website is trackways.co.uk. I haven't actually linked the book to my website, or the new book to my website. I think my other book, True Nature, is linked to my website. But I'll do that shortly, and maybe in the comments we can put a link to From B to A, because that's available on Amazon. And I think all you need is From B to A, from beta to alpha, or if you key in my name, my surname is quite unique, so that will bring up myself and my relatives. So if you put my name in, Schorr-Kon, along with True Nature or From B to A, then you should find your way to where they are.
And they're both available on Amazon?
Yes, yeah.
But also both available on your website, or the new book isn't linked
I haven't linked my new book to the website yet, and I haven't put a list of courses up for next year, but you can see the sort of courses that I've been offering, and that I offer on trackways.co.uk. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for taking the time today, Thomas. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for the invite, and it's been joyful. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the book. I have to say, I really thought I was coming to the woods to collect mushrooms. We didn't find any mushrooms that time, but leaving with this book, I wanted to really race through it so I had more to talk about today. But the best compliment I can give the book is it slowed me down. I'm working my way through the book. It's more of a resource guide tool for me. I'm dyslexic, so the thought of reading a book from cover to cover is too much. But now this is perfect material to remind me to slow down, and I'm learning loads from the book. So yeah, really big thank you for the book.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, mate. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to put Thomas's book in the links below, and Trackways, is it .co.uk?
Yeah.
For his website. Great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Okay. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers, Thomas. Thank you, mate.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Speak soon.
Bye.